This is chapter number 9, the making of regional cultures. Regional cultures. So this is chapter number 9 and making of regional cultures. So before we go ahead, we are talking about 8th and 18th century, between 8th and 18th century. So there are certain periods which we need to understand because there are different centuries which are being talked about. So we need to understand that whenever I say this century, which century we are in, under which empire we are. So 8 to 1200 or 800 to 1200, it was pre-medieval era. 1200 to 1526, 27, it was Delhi Sultan. And 1526, 27 to 1707, it was Mughal Empire. So these are the landmarks which you need to understand. So let me tell you, let me ask you a question. So a person will come and he says you, "Oh Paji, ki haal hai tuada?" What will come into your mind? This person is a Punjabi. Maybe he belongs to Punjab, some city in Punjab, and the dress he may be wearing somewhat related to Punjabi culture, or the music he might be listening to is Punjabi music. So you are actually relating him to certain place. So this place, by subconsciously comes into your mind. So whenever some person, some community, some group, you want to understand them or they are being understood by being Tamil, you'll say, oh, he is from Tamil Nadu. Someone is speaking Odishi, you'll say from Odisha he is. So Tamil Nadu, Odisha, you have marked the areas in your mind. Along with this, there are different attributes, characteristics of this region. That is, what is the food they eat, what clothes they wear. Sardarji or Sikh, they generally have a pagadi, and then poetry, whatever they have been writing or they have been listening to. Dancing, Punjabis may dance Bhangra. And what are the music? Some, Hani Singh or Sandhu. Then we have painting, what kind of painting they are making or they used to make. So all these are the distinctive features, something very different from others. So whatever you have lived, Paji Kwal hai tuada, you knew that he has a distinctive, very special, or he has a culture. He has a special culture, regional culture. So it has taken years. These cultures have developed. Now you are in such a position that you can identify this regional culture. But this has not come in just one day. And all these cultures, they all are mixed. They all are being influenced from one another. So the regional cultures which are developed is not just one place. It has not interacted with any other culture. So there are certain cultures are only confined to one region. Oh, the Tamil Nadu will not have say chola bhatura, but you will find dosa and idli in Punjab for sure, Tamil Nadu's. So there are certain cultures which are going from here and there and changing their true value. That is a culture coming from one place going to another, and the culture is entirely changed, or it has taken a new shape, or two cultures, different place, may have the same meaning. They are still kept in the same way. So these cultures have different kind of flavors. This culture, Sanskriti, what all defines us, what all make us. So we will try to start with a language, Malayalam. We'll talk about dance also, all these things. So Chera, I'm talking, Cheras. So when the Cheras were there were Cholas and Pandyas in the southern India part, peninsula basically, Pradeep. So this is the region we are talking about. This is Chera region. This is Chola region and this is the Pandya region. Chera, Chola, Pandya. Pandya, if you remember, Madurai was the capital. So today's Kerala was almost with the Chera. It was the Chera. And actually right now if you see Kerala is the best state of India. So when we talk about Kerala, you will be, thinking about Mammootty, the superstar there, right? Malayalam also, Malayalam good movies. So this Malayalam, how this language has come, how this language has developed under say Cheras or different dynasties, what shape it has taken. So whenever I am talking about this Cheras, I am taking a place, Mahodayapuram. This is a proper place, kingdom. Mahodayapuram. So the Chera kingdom of this Mahodayapuram, this is a place. And it was created or established in which century? In 9th century. Which century? Between 800 and 900. So 9th century, and where this is in the southern western part of peninsula. Peninsula is what? The land which has three side water. This is peninsula. So this peninsula, it is being said southwestern part. Southwestern part. So south is this, west is left. So this is the part. Actually we are talking about Kerala only, or Kerala or nearby areas. So the present day Kerala, this and at that time also Chera kingdom, when Malayalam was spoken in this area, not that Malayalam which we know now, but a Malayalam language was spoken at that time. Okay. So Malayalam language has a very special thing, palindrome. If you read from the back, it will still be Malayalam. So this Malayalam language, the rulers of this Chera rulers, they used this Malayalam language as official language. That is, this whatever orders they want to give. First, let me tell you what does it mean when we have a language as a script. Because there are language which are spoken, there are language which are just spoken, but there are language which are spoken and they can be written also. So there are certain languages that can only be spoken, not being written. They don't have their lipi, they don't have their script. So Malayalam was the language which was spoken also and which has its own script also, so that it can be written. So the Chera rulers, what they did, they were using it for the official purpose. They were inscripting it, abhilekh, writing it on the stone or wood, their orders and everything for their praja, for their regime. They were using this Malayalam language to provide the information, orders, etc. And the regional language, this is the first language, Malayalam language, used as an official language by Cheras, and this was one of the first languages which was used as official language by Cheras or by any kingdom in the subcontinent. Okay. So this was the most important thing about this, that this Malayalam was used by a certain kingdom people as an official language. So you can understand the importance of this Malayalam language, and that is how we know Malayalam now. So this is an inscription, example of inscription. This is a picture. This is an early Kerala inscription which is composed in Malayalam. There is some changes in Malayalam which we know now. So it's somewhat different. Now Cheras did what? They took mostly from all languages, basically from Sanskritic traditions. So they were influenced. They took various things from Sanskritic traditions. How do we know this? The temple theatre. Because in a theatre, there are theatres in a temple, and people used to, or the performers used to show these stories. They used to show these stories, and they were borrowed from these Sanskrit epics, Sanskrit Mahakavya. Okay. Taken from Sanskrit epics, the Sanskrit epics, Sanskrit Mahakavya. And temple were very important at that time. Center of all the political, religious and economical center the temple would be at that time. So the presentation of this Sanskrit epics, it emphasized that how much Sanskritic tradition was taken up by Cheras and also Malayalam. So this Chera era, Sanskrit was, they were indebted to Sanskrit. So if I take you to 14th century, there was a grammar and a poetics book which was written, kind of a shastra, Kavya Shastra and grammar. A book was written, for example. Just remember as a book. The name was Leela Tilakam. The book was Leela Tilakam. This Leela Tilakam was written in 14th century. It was dealing with grammars and poetics, and it was composed in what? It was composed in Mani Pravalam. Mani Pravalam. And Mani Pravalam literally means what? Two things. Sanskrit and regional language. So it was an analogy with diamonds and corals. So Mani Pravalam, Mani is diamond, or diamond and corals is Munga. So diamonds and corals, and this has an analogy with two different language. Diamonds means say Sanskrit and corals means say regional language. So combination of this script or the content of Sanskrit and regional language, they combined, and that their combined structure is called as Mani Pravalam, that is the grammar and everything. And in this, Leela Tilakam was written. Leela Tilakam was written in Mani Pravalam, which has the content of Sanskrit and regional languages. So Malayalam literature has influence of Tamil and Sanskrit, and in Mani Pravalam, Leela Tilakam was being written. Okay. So we just talked about Chera, how this language developed in Chera dynasty. So now we are talking about Jagannath cult, Jagannath Puri, Jagannath, Baba Jagannath, Bhagwan Jagannath. This is one of the dhams. People used to pilgrimage, go for pilgrimage. So let me show you the place. This is the Odisha state right now. This is Bhubaneswar, the capital. And if you go ahead, it's in the seashore or near sea is Puri, Jagannath Puri. This is the area we are talking about. Now, why are we talking about this Jagannath Puri? Because the time which we are talking about, there were temple towns. That is, those towns, the basic center of all the activities were temples. People are there, economic activities going on there, the king is there, everything is going on from the temple only. So when we talk about Jagannath, so Jagannath Puri actually we call it now. So what is this Jagannath? Jagannath is Jag Ka Nath, Lord of the world. Jag means world, Nath means Swami, the Lord. So Lord of the world. This literally means Lord of the world. Jagannath. So whole world Lord was called as Jagannath, and it was previously this Jagannath was a local god, but at that time Vishnu, Shiva and Durga Mata was the main god and goddesses, three. So ultimately this local god Jagannath was regarded as the incarnation of Lord Vishnu. This deity was a local god, and this Puri Ilaka, Puri area, this Jagannath was there only, situated to local area. But finally it was supposed that he is, the Jagannath god is a Vishnu's incarnation. Like Ram Bhagwan, Krishna Bhagwan, all are incarnations of the Vishnu Bhagwan. So the local tribal, the Janjati, the local tribal of that area, they would make the wooden image of this deity of Jagannath. So please remember, not of stone but of wood. Wherever you will see the Bhagwan or god and goddesses in stone. But here they were being made cast. Cast means wood, lakdi. So this is how the thing started. Tribal people were making it. They are also the worshippers, and finally it was identified as incarnation of Vishnu. So this is the mandir, this is the temple I am talking about. And who made it? Raja Anantavarman of Ganga dynasty. So in 12th century there was a Ganga dynasty in this region, Ganga Rajvansh, and there was one very powerful and known king, and the name is Anantavarman. Anantavarman. So this Anantavarman, he said, okay, Jagannath was very famous god, so he made a very big and majestic temple. Still, it is one of the best temples which we see today, right? After that, 1230. In 1230, King Ananga Bhima. This is King Ananga Bhima III. He is King Ananga Bhima III. So Ananga Bhima Deva III. So I am talking about 13th century. So 1230 actually, it's 13th century only. King Ananga Bhima, he dedicated his kingdom to the deity, to Jagannath, Bhagwan Jagannath. He dedicated all his kingdom to Bhagwan Jagannath. And he also said, Ghoshana, proclaimed that I am the deputy. Let us give you an example, CM, deputy CM. So if CM is not there, he is ill or he has gone somewhere, who is taking care of CM? Deputy CM, deputy chief minister. Similarly, here he by himself regarded or proclaimed himself as the deputy of the god. Now what happened? By the course of the time, this temple got so much recognition, and people would come here, and the pilgrims would come here. So whenever the temple becomes famous, people start coming here. Even if you make a small shrine or put a stone, people would come and start worshipping it. Even a stone if you put, or a mazar, everyone will come and they will worship, because people have emotions, people have love for their god. So this was a big thing. Jagannath Puri was a big thing. So it became gradually as a pilgrimage place. People used to come for pilgrimage here. So those who are very devoted to the god, especially to the Lord Vishnu, Ram and Krishna, they would come here. So when they come here, they will donate. All the economic and all the the GDP etc. of this particular area will increase. So now this mandir or temple will become powerful. Socially, politically, all the matters will be in the hand of this mandir or the temple. So when we talk about Odisha, it is presently Odisha. It is not Orissa. Right now the name has changed, Odisha. So whoever has conquered this Odisha, Jagannath Puri, may it be Marathas, Mughals or East India Company even, they all wanted to gain control or to have a niyantran on this temple. They wanted the control because everyone was knowing that if we have to get the hold of local people, if our rule has to be acceptable to these local people, we need to have control on this Jagannath Puri temple. So we talked about Jagannath temple, Puri, how this temple town developed. Now we'll talk about Rajputs and the traditions of heroism. The valor, the power, the love, the friendship, everything is related to Rajput. Let me show you the area we are talking about. This is the Rajputana area at that time. Ajmer is the capital of that Rajputana. Right now Ajmer is very famous for a shrine. I want you to name me that shrine or dargah. So in the 19th century, which is today's Rajasthan, Rajasthan is one of the states, and the Britishers at this time, they were calling this area as Rajputana. They were calling this region as Rajputana. We have Rajputana Rifles, proper regiment in our Indian Defence Army, Rajputana Rifles. Now, this is what is being thought, that this area is mainly inhabited by Rajputs. Only Rajput. Rajput means what? Means the son of a Raja, of a king or a powerful man. Rajput. So this is how this word has came. And this is not true that this whole area is only having these Rajputs only. There were different kind of caste, creed, religion people they were living. But the Rajputs have a very important effect on this area also. The history, they have a name. They have a different culture. That is, this whole area is influenced, the culture of this area is influenced by, is affected by, is termed to be the culture of Rajputs. So let us take the 8th century. Let us start from that time. The present day of Rajasthan, it was ruled by various Rajput families like Chauhan family, Solanki families. That is, these are different dynasties at this time. If you remember, I always tell you 8 to 12, this is pre-medieval era. So various Rajputs dynasties evolved. And we should talk about Prithviraj Chauhan and why he is so famous, and he was one of the important ruler of Rajput. Rajput, when they fight, when they are in the battlefield, they always either win or they die. That is, they will never come back with their peach, that is the back, on the other partner or the warrior side. So this Prithviraj Chauhan, he was the last ruler of Chauhan or Chahaman dynasty. And he was the person who sat on the throne, Singhasan of Delhi. And during his Shasan Kal, his reign, Muhammad Ghori, Sultan Muhammad Ghori, he invaded India. It was 1991. And there was a famous battle of Tarain. And this battle, Prithviraj won. But the next year, Muhammad Ghori, he defeated Prithviraj Chauhan. And Prithviraj Chauhan, as we know, he died in the battle. Okay, this Tarain is near Thanesar in present-day Haryana. So this Chahamara dynasty, it has a very big regime, and he was also called as Rai Pithora, Prithviraj Chauhan, and he was an Indian king, and he ruled Sapadalaksha. That is the conventional, traditional Chahaman territory. And if we talk about today, it was extended to Rajasthan, Haryana, Delhi, some part of Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh. And his capital was, as I just said, Ajaya Meru, and that is today's Ajmer. Famous shrine of Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti Dargah is there. So what was very special about this, that they have a lot of stories to be told about. Kahaniya. There were so many poems, different art, means their literary form that was talking about their power, their loyalty, their friendship, their love, valor, anger. So all these poems were written and it was recited by, sung by special trained people who are called minstrels. Bhat we call them. So minstrels, they used to recite them. And why they were reciting them, it was expected that whosoever is in the Rajput family, or whosoever belongs to that region or area, whosoever listens to it, he or she gets inspired by it, influenced by it. So the dramatic depiction of all these, which was about the Rajputs, the ordinary people, they also get attracted by the dramatic way, or in a drama way, these all things are presented to them. And these dramas were almost true. So you can take an example of various movies we have. So Rajput, which has a proper Sanskriti or culture. So what are to be shown in this drama? They used to show the loyalty, that is friendship, that is A very true friendship these Rajputs will do. They will always remain loyal to their masters. Then we have love, emotions. मोहब्बत जंग में सब जायज है. Love, valor, shaurya. That is, the power will remain intact. Anger is not about fighting with people. Anger is about living it. You are in a battlefield or you have to safeguard an area. So if you see various movies like especially the Bhansali's movies like Padmavat, etc., you will always see there is a woman involved. And in world also, Jar Zoru Zameen, these are the three key points, reasons why every crime happens. Jar Zoru Zameen, that is money, wife or girl, and the land. So the women in this region or this poems, etc., it's being said that the women were following the idea of what their men were doing, or the men would do what? Women were beautiful, so they wanted to either protect them, their women, or they want to win another woman, somebody's women or some other women. So they wanted that girl or woman, so they wanted to win or protect, and they used to fight for that. And most of the women, Rajput women, they also have that blood. So they would do everything what their husbands they used to do, that is the heroism of their husbands, either in life or death. You see, they may fight. They may fight for them if they die. Or if they die, what they will do? They will do practice of sati, that is also called Johar. That is, in the funeral, in the fire, they will just sit or they will just jump. So Raja Ram Mohan Rai later on, he tried everything to abolish this sati pratha. And can you imagine that a man who has died and a woman is forced to, or by herself, becomes sati. She also gets burned in this fire. And this used to happen in the past. Can you imagine this? So these are all, the things which you need to understand, that you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't, go into all these. Just think logically these were bad things, but this happened in history. Basic thing was, you had to pay for your life. You marenge or marenge, like this. Now let us change the topic to the dance. Okay, Kathak. I'll show you and I'll tell you these are different forms, classical forms of dance in India. And these dances have long history. This has not just come. Like if you go to, other parts, Zumba and other dance like ballet, they have a culture, they have a Sanskriti. So when we talk about Kathak, what was Kathak basically? Kathak was the name of a tribe. It was name of a tribe, and these tribe would go to temple or different places, mainly temple, and they would present a story. They would present a katha through what? Gestures, through songs, through their body, through their face, through their emotions. So they would go to temples with their bhava bhangima. See, if these women are actually showing Kathak with their gestures. So this Kathak was the name of the tribe, and this Kathak shabd has come from Katha. Katha. What is Katha? Katha means story. It's a story, kahani. Right? Katha, kahani. So this Kathak has come from this word, Kathak, which was actually the name of the tribe. So this is all about gestures. This is all about showing or presenting yourself in such a way that you are trying to tell a story with your body. So when I take you to the 15th and 16th century, there was Bhakti movement. There were different streams of Bhakti movement. And let me take an example of Radha Krishna. What do you say when you in Bhakti movement? Mostly people say that the way I love my wife or a girl or a lover, the same way I love my God. That is the intensity with I love my girl. That is how I love my God. So Radha Krishna, they were not husband and wife. They were just lovers. and the way they love, it was the so intimate love, so they were into one another, means love. It was called as Ras Leela. Ras Leela. It was Ras Leela, means making the other as your God and loving them. So this was a part of Bhakti movement. So now this Radha Krishna, this folk dance, Ras Leela, when it got combined with the Kathak storytellers, because Kathak storytellers were all about gestures of the hand and the body. So this folk and Kathak combined, and then this Kathak took a very new Shaili. If you see that how these women has put their hand, the way they have put their hand or placed their hand, they also have a specific reason for this in this dance. That is, it's not about Govinda or Mithun Chakravarti dance. It's about everything is well organized and defined. So this was very good at that time, but it went up to the highest level under the Mughal era. Mughal emperors, and also their big people, like we call them as Abhijat Varg or nobles. Now, the people who used to perform Kathak in front of these in the court, and this dance now took a very, very different flavor in this Mughal emperor's court. So the level increased higher. So the Kathak, because as I said, because of this coming to Mughal court, it took a very different shape and it became very more refined. And this dance form basically gone to different gharanas. Gharana means your forefather, then your father, then you, your forefather sings, then your father sings, then you sing, then your son will sing. So what does it mean? It's a gharana then. That is, genealogically or traditionally you are singing on this, so that you are from a gharana. So this gharana, basically Kathak went to two different gharana streams where it flourished, it developed. So one of them was Rajasthan. It was Rajasthan, basically it was Jaipur. And first gharana or that tradition culture was developed here. And second was the Lucknow. Lucknow, basically Lucknow comes in Awadh region. That is the end part of UP right now. This Lucknow and Awadh and Rajasthan, Jaipur, as I'm saying that this person which you see here, this Wajid Ali Shah, he was the last Nawab of Awadh. Sultan Wajid Ali Shah, Nawab of Awadh. And one of the movie I have seen, and he was dancing, he was shown dancing. He was so into this Kathak that Wajid Ali Shah was also dancing Kathak. And this, he actually, under his patronized way, under his Sangrakshan, this grew again in a major art form. And there is one word called entrained, that is Hindi called Sthapit. So at this time, this dance flourished so much, it was imbibed and accepted so much, danced so much. So the last quarter of 19th century, around 1875 you can say, so this dance not only remained in these two or few gharanas, this dance propagated, spread because of the style it has. It went to Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. So let me show you here. This dance got famous and accepted in all these areas which you see. Okay, it spread from these two gharanas to different places. And the most important part is that you need a very rapid, very intricate, rapid footwork. If you see the dance, you will see a woman taking round and round 100 times. This is a rapid footwork. Every foot has to be well placed. It has to be elegant. The costumes, the dresses are very fine, beautiful. Has a special attention when you see. If you see Kathakali, you can say that, okay, this is Kathakali because of the costume. And the basic idea that everything was about showing the story, enacting the story with your hand, with your face, with your dance, with your footwork. What you are doing, you are actually telling a story. Okay. So footwork, costume, and enactment of stories just make it more intricate. So the Kathak, and not only Kathak, every other cultural practices which were followed by Indians, the Britishers were not very happy about it. They were not in favor about it. So the British administrator, they didn't like this Kathak, but still Kathak, it remained, it survived, and it continued to be performed. And finally, when we got independence, there were 6 classical forms which were recognized, and one of these were Kathak. 6 after independence, but now we have 8 classical dance forms. Please remember, these are not only 6 dance forms right now. If you are you're very into GK, you must understand there are 6 classical forms. Classical forms means are classical. They are different. They have a long history. So these are the 8 classical dance forms of India, and they are developed in different regions. So these were 6 earlier, and now we have 8. Let me tell you again and again, this now has become 8. 6, then 8, right? And every dance has a different flavor, different ambience, different way of performance. Okay, so let me tell you this one. Bharatanatyam, it developed in Tamil Nadu. Bharatanatyam in Tamil Nadu. Then Kathakali where? Kerala, Kathakali, Kerala. Odissi where? Odisha. Then coming to Kuchipudi, Andhra Pradesh. Kuchipudi, Andhra Pradesh. Then coming to Manipuri, as the name suggests, Manipuri, where? Manipur. Then there are 2 more. One is Mohiniyattam, the other is Sathariya. Mohiniyattam and Sathariya. Mohiniyattam is also the southern India dance, basically Kerala region. And Sathariya is Assamese, is from Assam and that region, northern northeast region. Okay, so all these 8 are the dances which are classical form accepted in India. Painting for patrons. Who are patrons? Sangrakshak means your mother, father are your patrons. Okay, who take care, who guide you. So what is the tradition of miniatures? What are these miniatures? This word has come from mini. Mini means small. So if you have a house and you are looking at say wall, then if you painted it, that is a painting. But if you have a painting of say a window size or a television size, that is called a miniature painting. So miniatures means the small painting. The word has come from mini. Mini means small. So miniatures are small sized paintings. What would you do when you were a kid? You will be given a paper, you will take a brush, and then if there is a powder, then you will mix some water, or you have a water paint. When you were in 6th, 5th, so you will make some mountains, some sun, there is a river, there is a home. This kind of painting we all have made. So this kind of paintings, they come under the category of these miniatures. And these are made generally, which we are talking about, are done by or made by the watercolor, Jalarang. It can be made on cloth also. It can be made on a paper also. So cloth or paper, both of them can be used. If you go to earliest time, people the hunters and gatherers, they used to make these paintings in the caves, walls of the caves or the stone of the caves. So initially the miniatures or the small paintings were made on palm leaves. Palm is a tree. So palm leaves are wood. And when I take you to the Western India of the era we are talking 8th to 18th century, so the Jain text, the Jain or Mahavir or Jain Dharma or religion, most of the texts, the miniatures are being made depicting these texts. Very beautiful of them. Now coming to the Mughals. So when Mughals came, Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan, they also became patron, they also guided, they also funded, they become patrons, and they had a very group of highly skilled painters. So they were patronizing these painters. So initially these painters were making what? Because they were getting emperor's patronage. So they were making what? They were making manuscripts, and manuscript means Pandulipiya, and all those containing some historical things, historical depiction, and poetry also. They wanted to show the poetry in terms of painting, Chitrakala. So these painters, patronized by the Mughal emperors, they were using quite brilliant colors, means chatak rang, like red color, like yellow color. So they were using these colors in order to show the historic accounts and the poetry. So mostly they were showing what? They would use this red yellow color because they were in the Mughal emperor. So they were showing the darbar, court scenes, what is happening in the court, royal court. Also battle, because battle are being fought so often. So scenes of the battle will be shown. And also the emperor or other nobles would go for hunting. So they'll show the hunting also. So these paintings which were made at that time of court scenes or battles or hunting, or even the emperor portrait, they were exchanged as a gift. They were used as a tool or as a thing for being used as a gift. Upahar. And this because this was only between these big people, only the emperor and his very close friends and associates, means the big people can only see this. Other people, the normal people, other than the painters, were not able to, or they were not given chance to see these Laghu Chitra, miniatures. So as I said, hunting. This is a picture showing Akbar, and he is relaxing because he is hunting, shikar kar rahe. So a miniature has been made, and if you see, yellow color mostly and red color, and it's a clear depiction that's just like a photograph. That is how the brilliant Chitrakala miniatures were being made. So when the Mughal Empire started declining, and various painters, they have to find some other way. So they changed the place. They went to these are the Delhi Agra places, because Mughal Empire was mainly situated, or the center point was here. So when the declination of this empire started, these painters moved, or they migrated where? All the regional states which were coming up, nearby regional places or states coming up, they would go to their Raj Darbar or courts. So these regional states also took these painters wholeheartedly. So this first thing, if you say Rajasthan and the Rajput basically, and Deccan. This is the Deccan Pathar above Hyderabad today. So this is Deccan and Rajput courts. They went Rajput courts of Rajasthan, and they made the paintings for these Deccan and Rajput local kings or local states. But also they also bought the Mughal artistic taste, because they were coming from Mughal Empire only. So a blend or a new Shaili, new way of paintings which included the Deccan and Rajput court Rajasthan along with the Mughal artistic style. This was a mishran, this was a blending being done, and they were also showing those trying to make those which were made in Mughal Empire. Along with this, they were showing portraits of rulers. That is, a ruler will stand with their, say, sword or something, and only he is painted. Means his portrait will be made, his Laghu Chitra will be made. Also court scenes will be made, because they were following Mughal examples only. But these kind of painting, along with these places I'm talking about, Mewar, Jodhpur, Bundi, Kota, Kishangarh, and in these places, whatever stories are being going on, like the mythological stories, mythological written material literature, and the poetry which are famous in this Mewar, Jodhpur, Bundi, Kota and Kishangarh region. So along with the portrait and the court scene, the scenes or themes of mythology and poetry were also being painted by these skilled painters. So there was a different taste and variety of painting which come up as it went to this Deccan area and Rajput, especially Rajasthan area. And there are different regions also. I'll show you one more region. I'll talk about two kind of miniature painting that developed in Himachal Pradesh. It's a foothill of Himalayas. So there are two places or two different kind of styles which gain importance or which were developed. So the miniature painting, as I'm saying that this painting, small painting, miniature painting, not only in these regions or the Raj Darbars, also in the Himalayan foothills, which is today's Himachal Pradesh, today's modern Himachal Pradesh. So development was what? There were two names. I am going to talk about Basohali and Kangda. So I am taking you to Basohali. 17th century, there was a different kind of miniature painting. Basohali was developed. And this was a kind of very bold and intense style of miniature painting. That is, showing some bold things, bold themes, and it was quite intense, means the war type things, various different other things are being shown here. That is, it was a kind of very strong showing style, Basohali, and one of the popular of this Basohali is Bhanudatta Rasamanjari. You see this picture I am showing you is Bhanudatta Rasamanjari. And this is very subtle picture, but I am trying to tell you that most of these were very bold and intense. This is a kind of subtle one. Basohali, I am just trying to show you how the Basohali was. So first was in Himachal Pradesh was Basohali. The famous was Bhanudatta Rasamanjari. And then Nadir Shah came. When he invaded, he conquered Delhi and he looted, and then he went away. After that, Ahmad Shah Abdali came. So mostly this region was very uncertain because it was being attacked by various attackers. So the people migrated. The painters migrated. So they would go where? Plain is uncertain. They cannot go to the south part. It's very far off. So they went to from plains they went to the hills. So I am going to tell you one more style of painting of Himachal Pradesh, and this is the picture I am showing you. This is Krishna, Radha and her companion, and this is a Pahadi miniature of Kangda. If you see, the color is somewhat different. It's green. It's very soothing to the eyes. Unlike the Basohali, Kangda is quite subtle and very simple. So as I was saying, these people who migrated to different place to Himachal Pradesh. Now, whenever you go somewhere, you want to eat, you need roti, kapda and makan. So when they went there, they don't have to think about that because the patrons were already there. There were people who wanted them to come. They wanted to help them because they wanted these painters to come and do certain things. So all these people, patrons and the painters, they combined and they developed a different kind of painting that is called Kangda School of Painting. So this is a picture of Kangda School of Painting. So the main thing was they used to use a very soft color, and they were quite impressed and inspired by Vaishnavite traditions. Vaishnav tradition. So the colors were very soft, green and blue. You see every green thing, you see green everywhere, you see blue, the water is blue, the sky is blue. So all these natural color they use, and there is a very lyrical treatment of themes, which are, you will see the lyrics in the photograph, a kind of geet in the photograph. So that is why they were kind of inspired by Vaishnavite traditions, and they would use very subtle color which are soothing to the eyes, and that is called the Kangda painting or Kangda School of Painting. So there were two, Basohali and second was Kangda painting, that developed in the Himachal Pradesh or the foothills or the the hill region of our subcontinent. Now, if you say that these paintings were what we got is only made by or only made at the big courts or kings and emperors, but if a person comes to your house and he paints, he is also a painter. So everywhere you will get painter. Painters are everywhere. So in Mughal Empire, those who were painting, they were also painters. So in Mughal Empire, the painting were gifted and they were kept in a proper manner. But the ordinary women, men, they were also painting. They were painting on pots, they were painting on walls, they were painting on clothes and floors. So everywhere they are painting, but because they were made by ordinary people and these pots, walls, floors and cloth, they were not kept in a way that is sanrakshan nahi hua. That is why we can't see them. So they didn't survive. There will be some painting at that time, but they didn't survive at that time. Miniatures, Laghu Chitra. Now we are talking about Bengal. Now this is a state. We have a state, not Bengal, but it's West Bengal. So you might be wondering why the name is West Bengal. Why it is not Bengal? Though we call it as a Bengal only. So the Bengal and also the Bengali language. So what we understand today, that this Bengali language has come or originated from Sanskrit, and you will be surprised, some people may be, oh, Bengali from Sanskrit, how is it possible? But it is, this is the fact. And Sanskrit has given rise to or birth to various other languages like Hindi. Bengali has come from Sanskrit, and this whole area is Bengal. So I am talking about which range? 8th to 18th century. Here, only some form of Bengali or you can say the local level language was spoken. No Sanskrit was there at all in earlier time. So how did this Bengali came from Sanskrit and how it affected and how it changed? How the present form of Bengali is what we see. If you see Bengal, any person from Bengal, he will be artist. He will be a singer. She will be a painter. They are artist people, good people. So I am taking you long back to 3rd and 4th century. 3rd and 4th century. So what was happening here? This is Bengal and the Bihar, southern part of Bihar, which is also called as Magad at that time. So this whole was Bengal. After that, today we know this by the name of Bangladesh, but this whole area was Bengal. So we have north, south, east, west. So when we are talking about West Bengal, it's having a boundary with Bihar. But the right one, which is the East Bengal, is having you can assume it to be Bangladesh mostly. So West Bengal we are talking about. So when we talk about Paschim Bengal or West Bengal, it's related to Bihar at that time, Magad basically. So the trade relationship between Bihar and this area started. So people would come here for trade, coming here and there. So there was a development of commercial ties, Vanijik Rishte. Commercially, trade was going on. So everything was going on. It was money, it was things, and it was culture, and it was language as well. Patliputra, Bihar has everything. It has Sanskrit, it has Jainism, it has Buddhism. Everything was happening in Bihar, Patliputra. So this is how the commercial ties gave rise to Sanskrit. What happened? No, Sanskrit doesn't go by itself. I am talking about 4th century. This area, this Bihar area, was ruled by Gupta rulers. They have control over this area. And now they had the control over the North Bengal. I am talking about upper part. Whole Bengal, the upper part of the Bengal. And now when they had the control of, these Guptas had control of the Bengal, northern region. So they tried to settle, or they actually settled Brahmins in this area. So this is Magad area, this is Bengal North area, northern part of Bengal, right? And there were already the trade relationship, and now these Gupta rulers, they tried to settle the Brahmans to this region. And what about Brahman? Brahman means Sanskrit, Brahman means Ved, Brahman means Puran, Brahman means all the rituals, Brahman means all the things related to Sanskrit. Okay, Shastra, Puran, ritual, Khans, Brahmins were going there, they were settling there. And it was being properly written. I'll give an example of Xuanzang. I told you and I showed you a picture of him also. Different people who came to India, especially Bihar, for Buddhism pilgrimage. So it was Xuanzang. He was a Chinese traveler, and he observed and he wrote as well that in Bengal he saw different types of flavor of Sanskrit was being talked about, were used all over the Bengal. So we have a proof that Xuanzang was saying different kind of Sanskrit was going on there. Now I'm taking you to the 8th century. Now here it was Pal Vansh, Pal dynasty. And this Bengal was under Pal Vansh or Pal dynasty. And then 14th to 16th century, when I'm talking about 15th to 16th century, this Bengal was ruled by certain sultans. Please remember, these were not Delhi sultans. They were independent of the Delhi sultans. They were local sultans. So they were rulers of sultan of this area. So the first Pal Vansh, then sultans, local sultan, and then came the Mughal Empire. In 1586, the Akbar conquered this area, Bengal. Akbar, great Akbar, he conquered Bengal. And he formed this Bengal as a Suba. He always do that. The Mughal Empire used to do that. He will make this Suba. So Bengal becomes the Suba. So whenever it becomes a Suba, there has to be some language, and basically they were using which language for administration all over the Suba or all over their empire. So this area will have a Subedar, it will have a proper system, which I told you all earlier in the different discussions. But the basic is the Persian language was used for administration that Mughal Empire was actually using. But also Bengali developed also parallelly as a regional language here. So from the reign of Pal, then the sultans, local sultan, then the Akbar, all this Bengali propagated, it developed as a regional language. Now coming to the 15th century, in fact, what happened here? The Bengali, see, let me show you this area. So we have North Bengal, we have West Bengal, we have East Bengal and the South Bengal. So everywhere Bengali was being spoken. Say it's B1, B2, B3, B4. Different parts means North, South, East, West I'm taking. So all their languages were spoken in different dialect, but it was Bengali. But they combined together. These all language were sutra, ekatrit ho gaye. They got combined. By which language? The language which was spoken in West Bengal. So the West Bengal language, it was the basic Bengali, which was able to combine B1, B3, B4, the different places where different Bengalis were spoken, and it acted as the key. So who were here? Who were here? Here who were? Bengalis were here. If you remember, this place was populated by the Sanskrit-speaking Bengalis, right? So Bengali has come from Sanskrit and basically from West Bengal. And not only this Bengali, you'll try to understand Bengali, where is Sanskrit then? I don't see any Sanskrit here. Bengali is a different language. But Bengali is a combination of different language, different dialects. So it's a culture. This language is a culture. The tribal language was there, local language. The Persian is also there. The European language also has a say in it. So this all has combined together to make the modern Bengali language. So Bengali started from 4th till 15th, almost, it's a 1000 year gap or duration, and this language became what we see now. So this all literature were written, people wrote different stories, poems, literature. So this Bengali literature has two parts. You can divide it into two parts. One is indebted or related to Sanskrit. The other is independent of Sanskrit. There is no Sanskrit involved. First one is Sanskrit related. The other is not Sanskrit related. The first one was basically the translations. So first one was, you have to keep in mind, first division we have done is translations. That is, Sanskrit epics like the Mangal Kavyas. Mangal means Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu, Mangalam Garuda. Mangal means something very good. That is auspicious, good poem which will do good to the people, which was mainly written for the local god and goddesses, local deities. So it was basically all the translation of the Sanskrit epics which I am talking about, Mangal Kavyas, about the local deities. And then there were different, bhakti literature also in this Bengali. So these are translations. So bhakti literature was also there because there were biographies, Jeevani of this person, very important, eminent personality, Chaitanya Deva, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So his biography was also translated to Sanskrit, from Sanskrit to Bengali, and he is a great leader of Vaishnava Bhakti movement. This time we are talking about Bhakti movement. So this person, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, was a great leader of Vaishnava Bhakti movement. So his biography was also translated into Bengali. So I just gave an example that Mangal Kavyas and different biographies, they were translated. That is why we are talking about one partition, one division, which is indebted to Sanskrit. It was basically a translation of Sanskrit, different literature which was already written in Sanskrit. The second part, or the second division which I am talking about, you can include Nath culture here. Remember Nath, Yogi, Siddhacharya, I told you? They were all talking about what? They were talking about yogas, they were talking about meditation, etc. So this Nath literature includes these songs of, let me tell you, Nath, if you remember, our UPCM is from Nath Panth, that is Yogi Adityanath. So the songs of Mainamati and Gopi Chandra were very famous. And here the picture I am showing is Dharma Thakur. He is Dharma Thakur. So the Mainamati, Gopi Chandra related songs and the stories which are related or concerned with the worship of this Dharma Thakur which I just showed you. And not only this, we have fairy tales, folk tales, ballads, small stories like the regional stories and the stories on which the plays can be done, some natak can be done, abhinay can be done. So these fairy tales, folk tales, ballads along with the worship of Dharma Thakur stories, along with these songs of Mainamati and Gopi Chandra, this has no relation with Sanskrit. So this is why I am saying the second part is not indebted to Sanskrit. The first part was. That is how Bengali, non-Bengali, we can differentiate, but Bengali has come from Sanskrit. I was talking about Mainamati, Gopi Chandra. What about that? The Naths, as I was saying, the Nath culture, Nath philosophy was what? It was all about sannyas. That is, what is this? What is sannyas? It is asceticism. Asceticism. So yoga, sannyas you take, you do meditation. This is what the Nath Panthis were saying. But in this case, Mainamati, she was a queen. But she wanted her son, Gopi Chandra, not to become because he was already a prince. So she forced or she requested him that you should go to sannyas, you should go to asceticism, right? Different obstacles you need to, whatever you have to think about becoming a Nath. And I was talking about Dharma Thakur, I showed you the picture also. He was a regional god, popular, very popular among this Bengali culture, popular regional deity. And he was worshipped in the form of stones also, in the piece of God. He is Dharma Thakur. Please remember Dharma Thakur. So this all is the second part of the Bengali literature. So I told you two part. One is indebted to Sanskrit, other was not. So because all these Sanskrit related, we already have a manuscript because it was being translated. So when it was translated, see, we know the time, 15 to mid 18th century, because we already have a manuscript of this. So we know the exact time. But the other category, which Nath I am talking about, Mainamati, Gopi Chandra and Dharma Thakur related, we cannot define it or we cannot precisely date it. Samay Nirnaya we cannot do. Precisely we cannot date. Just because the other has manuscript, we can date it. Now, peers and temples. When we have a good person, you say, you are a peer, you are a sadhu, you are a saint, you are a Sufi. This is how we generally address someone if he is a good person. So in this region, these peers were there. And Persian meaning of this peer is a person who is giving you spiritual guidance. That is what is about the life, what is knowledge, what is love, what is actual presence of yourself in this earth, right? So I'm talking about 16th century. People began to move on or to migrate. They started from a less fertile Western Bengal. Western Bengal is not very fertile, but if you take the eastern part, this is the Sundarbans. It has a very, very good mitti or so say clay, because the Ganga is also coming, the Brahmaputra is also coming. So people started migrating from this place to this place, means from west to east. And this started in 16th century. From less fertile, the people, Kamabjau, they went or they migrated to the good land, which we already see why it is. So it was forested and it was marshy also. And as they moved towards that, what they did, they cleared forest. That is slash and burn technique. They take one place and burn it. Then they do this cultivation. They do go other place and then slash and burn. This process go on. So they brought all these region of forest under rice cultivation. They were cultivating rice, paddy, chawal uga rahe the. So the East people who were there, they were basically Machwaras or fisher folks, those who used to catch fish, and they were doing shifting cultivation by themselves also, that is the tribals. So the local tribals, along with the fisher folks and those people who are coming from the west, those who are there and those who are coming from west, they combined together, or the better word is they merged together. So those who are coming from migrating and those who are already there, they were combined, they merged. Okay, so there was a common community being formed. And this is the same time when Mughal got control over Bengal. Mughals, they got control over Bengal. And now Mughal Empire, what they did? They made this eastern delta of Dhaka. This is the Dhaka. Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh today. So Mughals, they made this eastern delta at Dhaka as their capital. This part. So they made this as their capital. So all these big people, they were getting big lands. So what they will do? Various people were there. So these people will make a mosque or religious place or places which will be helpful. See, let me tell you, mandir and masjid are not only for praying. They are places where people help each other. If somebody is have problem, these masjid, mandir are all, gurdwara all is there because of this. So the people who are settling from here to here, if you settle, what do you want? You want roti, kapda, makan. You want food, you want shelter, you want money. So those people who are going there from eastern part, western part to eastern part. So these people who had land and they had some religious places they have made, they were welcoming them. They were giving them all the love, order and assurance and everything. They were giving these people because they were powerful also, and they had land also, they had mosque also. So they were giving these poor people or the settlers, They were giving them all the love, what they actually wanted. Everyone wants some kind of assurance. So now these people who are giving assurance, they were community leaders basically, and they sometimes become teacher also, sometimes they become judge also, that is adjudicators. So these people who were welcoming others, and they were becoming these people were teacher also, they were judge also, they were helping us also, and they were assumed to be having supernatural power. That is, they are going to solve our problems. So people who are coming, they saw these people who are welcoming them as their related near to God, or with love and affection. They have started referring them as peers. So all these people who were welcoming them, having mosque and other religious places, they were called as peers. And peers is not only for these people, for Sufis, for saints, for religious personalities, for daring colonizers. That is, a colonizer who used to make colony, and he is quite daring. Now he wanted to help others. So, and deified soldiers. That means a soldier, a warrior who has gone to the Sharan of Bhagwan or God. Deified soldiers. So deified or daring colonizers, religious personalities, different Hindu and Buddhist deities, Hindu and Buddhist god and goddesses, and also animistic spirits, Jivatma, animistic spirits, Jivatma also, So these, that is all these were referred as peers. They all were called as peer. Okay? Peer Paighambar, you might have written or you might have seen. So you can see all over Bengal the shrines, dargah of peer. On the right side you can see Gutihari Sharif. I just wanted to tell you that this is the kind of shrines we have. So the temple building, it started in late 15th century. A lot of temples were being made. But in 19th century, it stopped also. It culminated. It stopped. Alright? So these temples and religious structures, we already know who made it, who used to make it. Those people who are having money, those who are people who are powerful, they wanted to show their power, they wanted to demonstrate their valor, they wanted to show the proclamation of their piety, that is Bhakti Bhav. They wanted to show the love to the God. So in order to show power and the proclamation of piety, that is the Bhakti Bhav, that is the love to the God, they wanted to show it. But many of them were made of very modest or cheap kind of bricks, bricks, and terracotta. Terracotta means mitti, different kind of clay. So the bricks and terracotta also were used to make these temples. And who made them? There were Nimna class, low social groups were making it. For example, the Kolu, the oil pressers, the Kolu were making it. The Kansaris, those who used to make the bell metal workers, like Mandir ka Ghanta, Teli and Mandir ka Ghanta banane wale, Kolu and Kansari were making it, right? So only, very modest kind of thing. But then came the European trading companies. When the European trading companies came, the economic condition of this Kolu, Kansari and other low social group, it emancipated, it grew. So they become, quite sufficient, and they become somewhat money-wise good. So they wanted to show their status as well. And they wanted to show by what? They wanted to show it making the temple. Every week people would make temple. So the Brahmins also accepted it. They recognized the deities, local deities. So the deity or Bhagwan who was sitting just in a thatched hut, a simple hut, now he was transferred to different type of temples, that is called Dochala and Chauchala. Dochala and Chauchala. So let me show you. This is a double roof thatched hut. This is called Dochala. There are two roofs, and this is Chauchala. There are 4 roofs. Dochala means 2 roofs and Chauchala means 4 roofs. These are the different kind of shelters or the temples which were being made for the local deities. So I'll just tell you about this Dochala and Chauchala, but you need to remember the Bangla dome, which the Mughals also were inspired by. So it's just like a jhopdi, but in a very proliferated form. Means the actual architecture was taken from the jhopdi, the huts, but it is made in a very prolific form. So let me tell you about 4 roof structure. So it has 4 roofs, and those roofs, though made very good, but it will look like a hut, a roof of the hut only. So these are 4 different triangular roofs, 4 roof structure, 4 triangular roof, and there are 4 walls here. 4 roof, different roof, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 walls, and it will be on certain elevated, that is, you can say on a square platform. So you have a square platform. These are Chauchala, 1, 2, 3, and 1 on the back. 4 Chauchala, right? And in this Chauchala, the interior was not very, means there was not decoration. It was quite plain. The interior was simple, very plain it was being made. Decoration was not that much, but the exterior was quite good. It was decorated with certain paintings, different kind of paintings. Even the tiles were made ornamental tiles, and the terracotta tablets, mitti ki patti, terracotta tablets, these were being used. So if you see here, this is a Chauchala being made in a very good form. Inside, it was not so much decorated, but outside, if you see, it's so beautifully made. So this is an example of Bishnupur, which is in Bankura district of West Bengal. So in Bankura district of Bengal, West Bengal, Paschim Bengal, there is a place called Bishnupur, and this picture which you see here is from there only. So we still have these structures. Now there is one more thing, fish as food. You know, wherever you live, you will eat what is locally available. The food habits will be on local production. So Bengal is a riverine plain also, that is, we have river here also, and Bengal is surrounded by, one part is, you have sea also. So rivers, Ganga, Brahmaputra, all is coming, and on the lower side, it's all Bay of Bengal. So everywhere it is fish. So fish was the main occupation everywhere. And as I said, rice cultivation was done. So rice cultivation, rice was also there. So mocher bhat, or fish curry with rice, it was the famous food. It was a food. So you also see these all in literature. It's being purely referred that in terracotta plaques on the walls of temples and various Buddhist viharas, monasteries, you will properly see that people are dressing the fish, and they're taking it to the market in the baskets. So everywhere you see wherever we have sea or river, you will find people eating fish, and they are fond of fish. So the Brahmins, Brahmins, they are not allowed. They cannot eat non-veg. They can't even eat eggs. So, but everywhere fish, the local production is fish. What will the people do, even if they are Brahmins or whatever caste they belong? So when this Brahmins can be poor, Brahmins can be, they can be, rich also. So what about the middle class? So the dharmic people, the Brahmanical authorities, they relax the prohibition for Bengali Brahmins. In Brihad Dharma Puran, it is being clearly written, in 13th century Sanskrit text this is, that certain variety of fish, the local Brahmins can eat. So now you will see that the Bengal Brahmins, they eat fish, but if you go to Gujarat, the Brahmins can never think about fish. These are the fish I am talking about. Fish is very tasty, you must try sometime. And it is very, nutritious also. Vitamin E. So this fish was being allowed there. Brahmins started eating fish because of the local level. If you go outside, till the 18th century, people in Europe, they were thinking that I am from certain empire. I am, say, from Austro-Hungarian Empire or Austro-Hungarian Empire. I'm related to certain empire, or I'm the Praja of certain empire. Or somebody is saying that I am from Greek Orthodox Church, that is, I'm the member of this church. I have this belief. right? Like Protestant and Catholic, etc. But in the late 18th century, people started thinking and they started identifying themselves as not this, but the spoken language. They were saying, I am French, we are Germans. So they started thinking about these languages as their community people that bind them. For example, Romanian school textbook, they were using Greek, but they started using Romanian. They stopped using Greek. In Hungary, they were using Latin, but they started using Hungarian. So the language was the main basic group idea. So people would start thinking of a region where they are speaking one language. In India, all the states mostly are made on the basis of the language being spoken. So if you take the border area, left and right will speak almost common language, right? So this is all about this topic. Thank you so much and take care of yourself.